Welcome to the Why Not You podcast, where our goal is to inspire, teach, and elevate your personal journey. Our heart-centered guests love sharing some of their life-changing aha moments, hoping that it might be of benefit to you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening. Our objective at Why Not You is to provide powerful stories that hopefully inspire and empower you. Today is certainly no different. My good friend of more than 30 years has joined us today, and the insight and principles that Susan is going to share will have an impact. Since 1987, Susan Hyland has thrived as a sales trainer extraordinaire, building her own brand, Hyland Academy, within the home building industry. For 11 plus years, she was the national sales trainer for Toll Brothers Homes, and she crisscrossed America, working in the largest markets, teaching the teachers. Susan, welcome, and thank you for taking a few minutes with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Susan, I like to give our listeners a little bit of background before we get into the meat of our message today. Tell us where you grew up and what it was like for you growing up in the Lombard household.
Oh my gosh. Well, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I am one of 8 children, the oldest girl. I'm number 2 in the family. And my parents had 8 kids within 10 years, go figure. But anyway, outside of that, I learned how to work really hard being that so-called second mommy when all these babies came along. So that was it. It was interesting life growing up. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. My father was a door-to-door salesperson. And that's how he raised 8 kids. So I learned the so-called personality or behavior that it took to sell product, let alone door-to-door.
Well, that's interesting because I come from a family of 8 kids as well.
Oh.
So, we grew up on the farm. I didn't know that about you, that you had 8 brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't exactly an entitled household then growing up.
No.
So elaborate a little bit more on that, Susan.
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that because I remember being in school and falling asleep in the classroom. I'd like to tell you that I was an amazing student. I was not. And the reason I was falling asleep in the classroom, because I think my mother was tired of waking up at 2:00 in the morning, bottle feeding the babies. So I would get up and bottle feed the babies and fall asleep in the chair, bottle feeding them. So, of course, during my school period, I wasn't quite altogether there, but I sure did work hard to make good grades.
You worked hard to get good grades. You were helping out at the house, and you were falling asleep because you were working hard.
Yeah.
And so where did it go from there, from high school and whatnot? Did you go to college? Did you not go to college?
I went to college. I was a high school, learned to be a high school cheerleader. I was a college cheerleader. And then I tried out for the Denver Bronco team cheerleading squad and didn't even make first cuts. So outside of that, I had a lot of drive. I got 126 college credits. I was studying to be a special ed teacher. And I decided in my senior year of college, this isn't for me. So I did not get my degree in special ed. It was a 5-year program, and I dropped out at the 5th year. And then I decided I didn't know what I decided to do. I just remember going out to buy my first house at $105,000 and about died at $105,000 because my dad said I was going to go to the poorhouse. And I remember the realtor. I remember her name was Marilyn. She said to me, after getting to know me, she goes, "You need to get your real estate license." And I'm not sure I knew how to spell the word real estate. And I go, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "Well, you just go study and get a real estate license and learn how to sell homes." So that's what I did. I did resell for about 8 to 10 months, and Continental Homes in Phoenix decided they wanted me on their team. And I said, "Oh, okay." And my first month selling in a community that they couldn't make any sales out of, I sold 16 my first month. And I remember the CEO of the company saying, "How in the heck did you do that?" And I said, "I don't know." And I, honest to God, did not know until I analyzed the behaviors of salespeople, i.e., my daddy. And I just, had the love of probably being a chatterbox, number one, but understanding how to get in someone's head and then creating a dialogue.
So how much of that do you think came from your father, being around sales and listening to the stories and whatnot, that he came home from after a day of door-to-door sales and whatnot? Did you pick up on anything like that? Or did you connect the dots at all until you're actually selling?
Yeah, I think my dad, of course, I didn't think about it then. My dad was a very right brain, friendly man. And everyone loved him. The power of relationship building was just amazing with him. But it was natural. It was a natural with him, and i.e., it became natural with me. And you'd think all my brothers and sisters, we would be like daddy, but we weren't. So I think understanding the stories that he would come home with were amazing, good and bad. So I learned that. I just learned how to be tenacious, I suppose. I think that's probably a strong word, being tenacious. I never gave up, and if people didn't buy from me, I assumed it was my fault because I didn't do a good enough job convincing them on making a decision. Whatever the decision was, I wasn't good enough making it. And so that I would really hone in on my skills. How I got into the training arena, Glade, and I don't know how much when I went to work for Continental Homes, I literally had braces on my teeth. I looked like a kid, and 23 years old with braces on my teeth. I think people believe kids more than they do adults. So when I sold homes, townhomes at the tune of $36,000, I think, my most expensive home I ever sold was $12 million. The technique and the skill was the same, but in all fairness, the CEO of the company had the salespeople groomed. He just believed in grooming and grooming and grooming. We hated the grooming. We hated having training every 6 weeks. We would pay attention to what the trainer had on. Like, why didn't he iron his shirt before he came out on stage? That was more important staring at that than what was coming out of his mouth. However, whatever were coming out of the trainer's mouth, all these years, it sunk. And when I was with him 10 years, he made me a sales manager and gave me an unbelievable paycheck and an unbelievable cell phone that was about the size of a coffee pot, and bought me a Cadillac that he paid for. I thought I was cat's meow. But the key, he said, was at 10:30 in the morning, I better never see that car in the parking lot. You better be out of there. And the goal was to be out in the field. We had 18 communities, and I was out in the field daily, observing, keeping an eye, coaching, supporting, inspiring sales teams. And to this day, Glade, my colleagues, there was 35 of us, my colleagues are top, if they're not retired by now, top producers throughout the country. And I had a regional president ask me a question about a year ago. He goes, "Susan, let me see if I can get this right." He goes, and he names, I'm not going to name the names. He names like 10 colleagues. And he goes, "You all work together?" And I go, "We did." This is at Continental Homes. And I said, "We did." And he goes, "Well, I'm not understanding. If all of you work together and yet so-and-so's president of this company, so-and-so CEO of this company, you were all presidents on boards, CEOs of other home building operations. How did that happen when you all worked under one company?" And Glade, I honest to God sat back and I thought, yeah, how did that work? Well, our CEO had us all groomed. And if you were not groomable, he had no interest. but we were all groomed and we all went in different avenues. And when I opened up Highland Bay in 87, I ran it till 2003 and was the top sales trainer in the country. I trained the top 100 builders, but it was like I was at the unconscious competent part. I knew what I was doing. I just really wasn't thinking about it. It almost came across naturally. So when I put together the training programs, Glade, I had to learn how to be the moment engineering, so to speak. I had to be able to spin on a dime based on the needs of the client or based on the needs of the attendee. And that was kind of it. It was almost like I was groomed for it, but I had the behavior of connecting with people so that they believed whatever came out of my mouth.
Well, Susan, when I first met you, that was, like 30, 35 years ago, and you were working at Continental Homes. You were the main trainer and whatnot. And by the way, Continental Homes, for those of you who don't know them, they were doing about 16 to 1,800 homes a year in the Phoenix market alone. And they were the largest home builder in the Phoenix metro area. And they had an incredible sales team. They were known as the best of the best. And I give you a lot of that credit, Susan, for what you did and how you taught them, and for the owner of the company for investing in their sales staff.
Right.
Susan, I want to go into now where Continental started buying up all these other builders that were doing really, really well. Tell us a little bit more about some of these connections that you made at Continental Homes and kind of where it grew from there.
It was funny because my assistant superintendent that I had at Continental when I was selling homes, we had a great connection, and he was a superintendent. He's about my age. And when I would bring lunch to work, I'd bring him a sandwich. I always connecting. If I brought a Coke, I brought him a Coke, whatever. So we built a beautiful relationship, and they made him the vice president of construction. And then they turned around and made him the president of construction. Of course, I was his buddy. And he marries she was an accountant, and they get married anyway. She was brilliant, and she's a beautiful gal. They went out and bought.
That's Kathy,
that's
right?
Kathy. They went out and bought Torrey Homes, Milburn Homes, Meffler Homes, Torrey out of Atlanta, Milburn out of Austin, Meffler Homes out of Miami. Let's see, Cambridge out of Chicago, Western Pacific Housing out of Southern California, Schuler Homes, I believe Schuler is in Denver and Hawaii. So they just went out and bought all these little home builders, and then D.R. Horton came in and ate them up. And my only regret is that I should have married Bob. No.
Well, no, wait a minute. So Continental Homes, when Bob and Kathy became the owners,
right,
they went out and they consolidated and bought up these other national, regional builders. And then when they had that all put together, then D.R. Horton, who is now the number one home builder in the United States, they bought Continental Homes.
That's exactly right.
Well, thank you, Susan, for sharing that story. And I think there's an important principle, and that is you never know where these relationships are going to go. The power of those relationships, of building, maintaining. And I believe it from here, didn't it lead into the training?
It was kind of interesting because back in the day, let's go, Glade, and I have to really double check the dates, but let's say 86, 87. And the housing market came to a little bit of a screeching halt. And I can't remember who changed the tax reform. Ronald Reagan, it could have been. So I need to actually double check those dates. So, everything was skinny down. I had left Continental, and Ken Hyland, my husband, and if you remember, he owned a property management company, and the apartments and housing, the multi-housing that he ran the association, some of them had single family apartments that needed selling or they were going back to the bank. So they asked Ken, do you think, you can figure out how to get us out of this hole? And Ken goes, well, I'll get my wife to do some training. And basically I set up a training program, And I remember builders around in Phoenix area found out that I had a training program, and they called and said, Susan, we know you got this training program. Can we put our people through it and we'll pay you? And I go, oh, you don't have to pay me. Just put them through.
Sounds like you.
Yeah. So about 8 months of that went on, where all these builders were putting in, 2, 3, 4 people for free. I thought, whoa, something's wrong with this picture. So I said bye-bye to Ken Hyland and decided to open up Highland Bay. And that was the story until 2003. I ran a sales training operation that I trained for the top, 100 builders. I had an evaluation service company. I also did placements, and I also did temp placements for the home building arena. So once people got in, and then Glade, which I'm tickled to tell you, and maybe embarrassed at the same time, you could not get a job in Phoenix unless you had my course. So it was kind of cool. And I remember Glade builders would call and verify some people that put on their resume they had Highland Bay, and they never did. They just found out that they had to take it in order to get an interview. So I was tickled pink, but on the other hand, that wasn't very nice.
No, I get it. And that is an absolute fact that when you were training all these people that wanted to get into the new home sales business, the local and bigger builders, they all said, you've got to go through that course first. We don't want to invest in you until you've invested in yourself and got trained, because it's very different. Resale and new home sales, very different.
Right. And yet, Glade, I know how different it is, but I love the idea that you just got finished saying the builders thought, man, if you're going to make an investment on yourself, a 24-hour program, then you're worth hiring in most cases. But with the resale operations today, I'm finding out that they need the skill sets more than ever. Besides taking a listing, taking it to escrow, put it in a title, put it into they need truly the skill set of how to sell and how do people buy. And this is new for me, but it was like an aha moment when I did my first resale class.
So, Susan, I know that your phone is ringing off the hook right now from the national and larger home builders across the country, because the market has definitely shifted.
Right.
And what are some of the things that they're saying about the last 3 to 5 years?
Well, I had a meeting yesterday with a major home builder I won't discuss, but they're concerned. I mean, the thing is, they're saying in the meeting, they haven't needed skill sets. They don't even need to have to follow up. Sales were just flying off the shelf, and these people were making a boatload of money. Well, now the tables have turned, and they're so desperate, and it's kind of cute. I mean, I'm tickled. They're fighting over dates. They need skill sets like tomorrow. And, there's only, 2 of us, but I think in time, hopefully, that old saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. We hope to God that they have tough salespeople. They'll get back to their basic fundamentals and add to it.
Perfect.
I think everyone, Glade, is a little cautious right now. They're nervous, but I think more than anything, they're nervous. They have a team like the one company I came from. They're all young. And I think awe to youth. They need to be young, but you need to still have somebody to groom them. You still need people that are seasoned that can groom them and groom them the right way.
100% agree. And then, I just saw a statistic yesterday. I was on a webinar, and they're across the country in the United States in the last year, there has been 113,000 new real estate agents nationwide. 1.4 million to 1.56 million, something like that. And the average experience of all these real estate agents across the country has dropped from 8 years experience to an average of 7 years experience.
Wow.
Well, when you think about that, that is the last 7 years experience average between 1.6 million real estate agents. They haven't seen 6% interest. They haven't seen it. They don't know what to do about it. When I started down in Phoenix, when we first met, it was 17% interest.
Yeah.
And to hold those deals together then and put them together, that took some skill set.
Oh, yeah. And it's so funny you say that, Glade. I remember it didn't last very long, 18.5% 30-year fixed. And then our builder lowered it, bought it down 2 points to 16.5. We thought we died and gone to heaven. Oh my God, we got 16.5. Yeah. It's, so unless you've had the experience from entry level till multi-million-dollar homes, the young, the youth, and hot dog to them, but they still need to truly understand the art. And it's important. They don't even, Glade, and I don't mean to knock this. These poor kids don't know how to write a thank you note.
It's true.
They don't.
It's absolutely true.
They don't know how to do a follow-up. They don't know how to pick up the phone besides doing their little machine, the tools that they have in their hands. Those are basic fundamentals. And I read an article, they said that for every salesperson that leaves a company, it takes 7 months of ramp up and it'll cost $100,000. So therefore, we need to make sure that the salespeople that are in those companies are trained, they're happy, and the builder is happy to have them, because salespeople are the income producers of the company. And so we just want to make sure that they got the skill sets so that they can, survive and thrive in this market that could be coming.
Well, and, training is key, but experience is irreplaceable. So, I applaud your experience and your wisdom that you've
Thank you.
accumulated over all these years of experience. And you've seen it all. You've seen the ups, the downs, the goods, the bads, and what have you. And in your opinion, Susan, is sales a noble profession?
Yes, because if something isn't sold, nothing gets, there's, everything's got to be sold. Otherwise, yeah. And it's a proud profession, especially if you're good at it. Some people think salespeople are barracudas. Well, there are some out there that are. I've had some experiences with some of them, and it's tough. Here's the key. They haven't earned the right to ask for the business. So they just ask. It's like fire, ready, aim, instead of ready, aim, fire. Or they'll go ready, aim, 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 and never fire. So we've got to, there's got to be a balance in there. I got to set them up, because asking somebody to make a decision is a no-brainer. It's earning the right to ask that.
Well, Susan, you over the years have trademarked a training system titled Octagon Critical Thinking. Is that correct?
Yes, since 2003, actually.
And tell us a little bit about how that all come together. And it is robust. It's a 2-inch thick, 8-course type of a system. I've looked through it, and it's amazing. But I'd like to know how it came about.
Well, I've always taught the sales process. How I understood it, it was called the continuous selling cycle. Remember Glade Critical Path?
Yes.
So for years, I did that. And then in 2003, I did a talk at Cranfield University, which is in Milton Keynes, England. And I did a talk at Warwick University. And they're called estate agents over there, where we're called realtors over here. And I met a gentleman that was a psychologist. And he told me that he teaches the psychology of decision making. And so we really fell in love with each other as our education. He would come here to visit. I would go there to visit with my husband. His wife would come here, the kids, and da-da-da-da. Well, he would teach me the psychology of decision making while I was teaching him critical path, or the continuous selling cycle. We did that for a couple of years. And finally, he said, Susan, I do not have the continuous selling cycle, i.e. critical path, and you don't have the psychology of decision making. if you give me yours, I'll give you mine. And I go, okay. He owns it in Europe. I own it here in the States. We braided the two together, hence 8 sections. And therefore, that's why I called it octagon critical thinking.
Oh, that's amazing. It's kind of the visceral or the mental side braided with, in your words, the action, the actual do it part.
Yeah, that exactly. So Glade, my goal with octagon critical thinking, when we braided the two together, my goal was, number one, I've had boots to the ground. That makes a huge difference. But my goal is to teach the salespeople not only the sales process, but while they're doing it, create a dialogue that fits that prospect. And they will be far more advanced if they think like the buyer and then take action based on their thinking. And use good business acumen, which is exceptional know-how. And it's not overnight. We can set the stage with training and skill sets, but it's ongoing until it gets buried, because I think Harvard Business Review said habits take 66 times. Ouch. But anyway, it does take a while for this to set in. But you get the people that are hungry and that want to be inspired, that have ego drive, in other words, the desire to win, and they have empathy for the buyer. Yeah, sales is a noble profession.
Awesome. Susan, if you would you share with the audience your most memorable testimonial?
I had one person, she was an on-site salesperson. This is in the Philadelphia area. She was an on-site salesperson for 35 years. And after she had the so-called basic fundamentals, whatever I teach, the octagon critical thinking, she came up to me and she goes, Susan, we brag, we have $2 billion in the bank. We could have had $3 billion in the bank if we would have had this. And that was probably my most exciting compliment. One other sales manager said, I've done training courses in 111 different countries, 36 different franchises, 40,000 people. This is probably the most thought of training program I have ever seen in my life. That was exciting. So I've been very blessed by having great testimonials. I had one girl that says, man, your inspiration is contagious. Your knowledge is contagious, and I do not want a vaccine. I thought that was good.
Well, you've made a powerful impact, and you continue on. No, that's awesome. I do believe that sales is a noble profession. Unfortunately, most sales organizations, most companies look at sales as an overhead.
Yeah.
And I totally disagree with that 100%. I think their revenue and actually administrators are overhead.
Yeah. Glade, it's funny you say that, because I would tell sales team members that are in a meeting, and especially with their bosses there, I go, you guys are the income producers of the company. If you don't make it happen, guess what? Nothing gets sold, nothing gets paid for. This building doesn't get paid for. And then I'd look at the management team and I go, I hate to say this, but you guys are overhead. And the sales team would laugh. And I go, so am I overhead. So there you go.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's so true. Well, Susan, how do people get in touch with you? What is your website? How do people get in touch with you in case they want to have some sales training? And by the way, this is not just for new home sales. This is for any kind of sales.
Yes. My website is hylandacademy.com. There's a contact us page, but before the contact us page, there's a section called services, and they can see all the services and the menu of curriculum. They can pick what they want. They can pick up the phone and talk to me directly. That always helps, because I can, share with them, my timeline and where I come from. And that's always helpful.
Well, it's an interesting time. And I think this is where builders, salespeople really get down in the trenches, develop their skill set. And you know what? What I've learned over my many years of experience in sales is good salespeople never are out of work. They're never out of work.
So true. So true.
Well, thank you for your time today, Susan. This has been fun. This has been, I think, very timely in the marketplace right now. And I know that the people that listen to this will glean some wisdom and expertise from some of the principles that you've learned and taught and continue to teach. So thank you again for taking your time.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you for having me.
We'd like to thank our guests for sharing a part of their experience with us on this episode of Why Not You? Also, we'd like to thank Mix It 6 Studios for producing, editing, mixing, and creating our great music for this podcast. But most importantly, we'd like to thank you for listening. Be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of Why Not You? See you next time.